get down to business. Thanks for coming out tonight.
I wrote me a manual, a step-by-step booklet for you to get.
Oh, I make money move.
You can't see me, my time is now.
What up? Welcome back to another episode of the Massive Joe Show podcast, Fitness Times Business. My name is Joseph Mencel, CEO of Massive Joes. I am your host. And guys, for the very first time, I'm riding solo in this episode of the Massive Joe Show. No accomplice, no apprentice, no confederates, no special guests. Just the microphone, the camera, for those of you watching on YouTube, you guys and I. And this is going to be a shorter than usual episode of the Massive Joe Show. But I'm kind of excited about it, to be honest, guys, because the topic that I wanted to discuss with you today, as all topics that we discuss in the Massive Joe Show podcast, transcends both fitness and business. And it's a topic that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I've actually started writing a little bit of content about it that I'm going to share with you guys on Instagram probably in the next couple of days. But I thought it would be a really cool topic to talk about in the Massive Joe Show podcast as well, because it does transcend fitness and business, because it is very important, and because I can get straight to the fucking point with it. I don't need to fluff around the edges for you guys with, you know, a discussion with you know, another party in the podcast or a guest in the podcast. I just want to get straight to the point. And the topic for this episode of the Massive Joe Show is how to increase motivation, or how to increase your level of motivation, how to increase motivation levels. And it applies to both fitness and business. I'm going to talk generally about it, but I just want to firstly set the scene for you guys. It applies to both fitness and business because we've all experienced the circumstances where we have very high levels of motivation and we can go to the gym and we can get our workouts in and we stick to our diet and we stick to our supplementation protocol and we're just fucking smashing everything because our motivation levels are so high, and it's super easy to do so. And it also then starts to feed into almost in a circular type fashion. It feeds into higher and higher levels of motivation that then becomes easier and easier. But then at some point it comes crashing down. And we go from a very high level of motivation to a very low level of motivation. And the same thing also happens in business or your career or whatever it is you do for work in a business or career field. A very similar situation happens is we can be very highly motivated for whatever particular reason, and we're smashing our work, we're smashing our business goals, we're smashing our KPIs if we're an employee, we're just absolutely killing the career and business game. And then that feeds into higher and higher levels of motivation, and we find ourselves kind of flying high, and then the same thing happens. Something happens that brings our level of motivation back down. And I think the first thing to recognize, and we've all experienced this, guys, is that motivation does go through cycles. It goes through cycles of when it's very high, and then it feeds higher and higher levels of motivation. And then something happens in life. It usually is something that happens as a particular event, although sometimes it's not. But let's say something happens, and all of a sudden that feedback loop of motivation, feeding action, feeding inspiration, feeding motivation, feeding more motivation and more motivation just comes to a very abrupt halt. And we find ourselves in a little bit of a hole where our motivations are very low. So the first thing is we have to set that scene, is that motivation. I'm going to take a quote, actually. I'm going to quote a good friend of mine. I call him my big brother. And that is, of course, the godfather of bodybuilding here in Australia, Tony Doherty. He has this quote where he says, motivation is fake. And what he means by that is that motivation is not tangible. It's not something real. It's not something you can ever grasp, that you can ever hold, that you can ever keep. It's fake because it goes through periods of high and it goes through periods of low. It goes through periods of high and it goes through periods of low. And it fluctuates. And because it fluctuates, it's fake. You can never hold on to a period of high motivation. You can never make sure that you never experience periods of low motivation. Motivation is fake. It has its own agenda. It has its own way of coming in to your life and then leaving your life. So the first thing to establish is that motivation does fluctuate like that. And we can all understand that because we've all experienced. There's not one person listening now who has only ever experienced high levels of motivation or only ever experienced low levels of motivation. Motivation is fake. Motivation fluctuates. And we all know that it's easy to do things both in fitness and in business when motivation levels are high, which means we really do want them to be as high as possible for as long a period of time as possible. We want our motivation levels to be as high as possible, as much as we can possibly keep them high, because that's when it becomes super easy to do things. But I'm not interested in talking about that because we all know that. We know that it's super easy to do things when motivation levels are high. Often we don't know what causes them to be high. Often we don't know what causes them to be low. And to be completely honest with you guys, it's completely irrelevant for the purposes of this podcast. What I want to talk about is the importance of discipline, and in particular, setting good habits and good routines that support both your fitness goals and your business or your career goals when motivation is high. And then I want to talk about different tips and techniques and tricks that I personally use that I want to pass on to you guys as some very practical advice on what to do when your motivation levels are low and how to get those motivation levels back up, trending towards a high level of motivation, because that's ultimately where we want to be. We want our motivation levels to be as high as possible, as much as possible, because that's when it's super easy to get shit done. So I'm going to share some tips and tricks with you guys on how to do that. But firstly, the importance of setting habits and routines and discipline, and why that's important, and when you need to set those habits and routines to carry you through low levels of motivation. So the one thing that I want you guys to do is when you are going through periods of high motivation and things are easy, that's when I want you to recognize that, to have awareness of that, and really start setting habits and routines and exerting discipline in executing on those habits and routines on a daily, weekly, monthly basis when motivation levels are high, because that's when it's the easiest to do that. And the reason why I want to do that is because when your motivation levels are low, exerting discipline against those habits and routines that do support your fitness goals or your career goals or your business goals is what's going to carry you through those periods of low motivation. However long they may last. They may last for a few days. They may last for a week. They may last for a month. Fuck it. You may go through some seriously traumatic shit and the levels of low motivation last for fucking years. The only thing that's going to keep you on track to achieving your fitness goals, your business goals, your career goals, when your motivation levels are low, when it's fucking hard to get out of bed in the morning, when it's hard to get to the gym, when it's hard to stick to your diet from a fitness perspective, when it's hard to do the tasks that you need to do to level up, to take your business to the next level, when it's hard to do the tasks that you need to do to achieve your KPIs if you're an employee of somebody else, what's going to keep you on track, what's going to keep you moving towards achieving your fitness, your business, your career goals when motivation levels are low is exerting discipline against those habits and those routines that support those fitness goals, that support those business goals, that support those career goals, which is why it's super fucking important that when you are in the state of mind where your motivation levels are high and shit's easy, that you actually take some time to set the habits and the routines that you can execute on when motivation levels are high, because it's easy to do so, that you get to a point where it's just almost like autopilot. So that when you go through the periods when the motivation levels fluctuate and you go through periods of low motivation, you're on autopilot. You don't even think about the habits and routines. It's not difficult to exert discipline against them because You've built the habits, you've built the routines that support your fitness goals, that support your business goals. You know how to stick to a diet. You know what time you're going to train every day. You know that the hardest part of getting to the gym is actually getting to the fucking gym and starting your workout. You know that there's certain things that you need to do to continue to keep your business on the level, on the path that it needs to go to level up. You know that there's certain things you need to do as an employee to reach those KPIs. You understand that, and you're just on autopilot. So it doesn't matter what happens to this fake motivation, whether it's high, low, in between. It doesn't fucking matter, because you're just on autopilot. You exert discipline, and you're able to execute on those habits and those routines that you know are going to support your fitness, your business, your career goals. So that's the first thing that I want you guys to make sure you're doing. Make sure that you are instilling those positive habits, those routines, and exerting discipline against them when motivation levels are high, so that when motivation levels are low, you're on autopilot, this shit becomes fucking easy. The next thing I want to talk about is to give you guys some practical tips, tricks, things that I use to help increase levels of motivation when they're low. So when you're going through a period where you just, man, it's hard to get to the gym. I just don't feel like training. I don't feel like sticking to my diet. I want to emotionally eat. For those of you who emotionally eat, I do every now and again. I'm not going to lie. I don't want to stick to my diet. I want to have a pizza or some ice cream or cheat on my diet. I don't want to do the difficult shit that I know I need to do to take my business to the next level. I just don't feel motivated at the moment. I don't feel motivated to go above and beyond what I need to do to reach my KPIs, to reach my stretch targets that my boss wants me to reach. My levels of motivation are just not there at the moment. So I have some pretty cool practical tips and tricks and techniques that I personally use when I find myself in a little bit of a black hole of low motivation, to help spark the process to get back to a high level of motivation. And the first one is what I just spoke to you guys about, is exerting discipline against the habits and routines, the autopilot type shit. Just doing that shit because I know that I've set those habits and routines, and I know that they're going to support my fitness goals. I know that they're going to support my business goals, my career goals. So that's the first thing that I do, is I make sure that each and every day I'm exerting discipline against those habits and routines. The second thing that I do is I start to stack small wins. And what I mean by this, guys, is I start to focus on just little small positive things that I call my wins. Small positive actions, small positive thought processes, small positive whatevers that I start to stack over and over and over again. So I might start one day and I might pick one particular task that I know is maybe outside of my comfort zone, that if I achieve that task, I go tick, yep, that's a win. And then I'll stack that the next day with something else. And then I'll stack that again the next day with something else. And I'm not talking about big wins, guys. When you're in periods of low motivation, you got to start fucking small. Your win may be, getting to the gym on a particular day. Actually setting a time where you know you're going to be at the gym on that particular time, and you actually get to the gym on that particular time. That's a win from a fitness perspective. Let's say that you've been sitting on an email that you need to send that is making you uncomfortable for a business or a career perspective. I'm talking about sending that email. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about big wins. I'm talking about small wins. I'm talking about the smallest of smallest wins that you then start stacking against other small wins. And then they become bigger wins. And then they become bigger wins. And you start to get this snowballing effect of, fuck, I'm actually, I'm achieving some shit here. And the effect that has, there's this quote that I really like to call upon when I find myself in periods of low motivation. And the quote is, action isn't just the effect of motivation, it's the cause of motivation. So if you reverse engineer that real quick and you think about periods of high motivation when you are highly motivated for whatever reason, that motivation tends to drive action. You're motivated, so you do shit. You then do shit, you win, that inspires you to do more shit, which feeds back into the feedback loop of elevating motivation. That's what I spoke about at the start of this podcast, is this feedback loop, this circular motion of motivation feeding high levels of motivation, feeding high levels of motivation until something comes along and just completely disrupts the process, and then you find yourself in a black hole of low motivation. But when you think about that in terms of high level of motivation, we know that high levels of motivation feed action, which feeds further high levels of motivation. And the same thing applies when you're in the black hole of low motivation, but you have to start with action. You have to start with doing something, with winning at something. And that's why I say start small. It doesn't have to be big. Start small. Just start with something. The reason why people find themselves in black holes of low level of motivation, and these low levels of motivation extend from days to weeks to months to years, is because they never actually fucking do anything. They sit there and feel sorry for themselves and go, oh, fuck, my motivation levels are so low. I just can't get motivated to go to the gym. I just can't get motivated to achieve my KPIs. I just can't get motivated to take my business to the next level. Well, the reason why you can't get motivated, fucker, is because you're not doing anything. And that then feeds into lower levels of motivation. If you think about high levels of motivation feeding action, feeding high levels of motivation, feeding action, feeding high levels of motivation, when you think about the flip side and you go lower levels of motivation feed no action, which then feeds lower levels of motivation, which then feeds no action, which then feeds further low levels of motivation, which then feeds you doing absolutely fucking nothing about it. And that's why you can't get out of that feedback loop, because you're not actually taking action to do anything about it. So this is what I like to do. I like to start with small actions, small positive wins, as I call them. And I stack them against other small positive wins. And I stack them against bigger wins, and then bigger wins, and then bigger wins, and then bigger wins. And we start to get this snowball effect where the action actually feeds the higher levels of motivation, which then feeds the action. And you start to flip the switch, and you go from low levels of motivation down here to starting to climb up the motivation level ladder until you get to higher levels of motivation. And then something comes and you go straight back down to the bottom and you start again. But that's how I like to do it. And now let me give you some very practical advice. Where I tend to start in terms of stacking these small wins. So I said start small, start very small. Where I tend to start when I'm thinking about stacking these small wins is I start right here, and you guys watch on YouTube, you see I got my phone in front of me, is I start with my morning routine. And I encourage you guys to start with a solid morning routine, because it feeds into not just what I was talking about with exerting discipline against habits and routines, but if you can start to feed things into your morning routine so that you're starting your day off with small wins and allowing you to stack those small wins within the first 30 minutes of you opening your eyes on a particular day, that's a really good way to set the foundation of getting yourself out of a black hole of low motivation. So I'm just going to read to you guys straight up. I want to be as practical as I can. I want to give you guys some actual advice that you can take from this podcast if you are in a state at the moment of low motivation. If you're not, you will be soon, trust me. We all go through it. So maybe you can come back to this podcast. This is what my morning routine looks like. The first thing I do is I won't look at social media or emails, or I've actually got in here, do not look at your phone for the first hour. And of course I'm going to look at my phone because that's where I keep my morning routine. But I'm talking about things that are going to cause me to be reactionary instead of actionary. And we've spoken about this in a bunch of episodes of the MassiveJoes Show. You want to spend as much time as you can being proactive or active, and the least amount of time being reactive. The worst thing you can do that's not going to support that is get up and the first thing you start checking social media, you check your emails, you check your Facebook messages, you check your DMs, and you start being reactive to all of these inputs coming in. So the first thing I do is I will not check any of that shit for the first hour. I wake up, I don't check that shit for the first hour. The first thing I do is I then acknowledge what my first thought is. And the reason why I do this is because it gives me a little bit of a gauge on where my mindset's at. So is my first thought positive? Is my first thought negative? Is my first thought a feeling? Or is my first thought an actual thinking about something? So I like to just think about what's my first thought. It gives me a little bit of a gauge. I can't do anything about it. I'm not trying to change my first thought. I just like to gauge where I'm starting that particular day, because it's going to let me know where's my motivation levels at? How am I emotionally? Where's my headspace at? Where's my mindset at? The next thing I go straight into is I think of something I'm grateful for. So I have a gratitude journal, and I'll write down between 1 to 5 things that I'm grateful for on that particular day. And they can be as simple as waking up in a warm bed. They can be as simple as my friends and family. They can be as simple as my support network. As simple as having freedom with my time. As simple as having a job. Real basic shit. But I'll write down, and I don't actually write them down with a pen and paper. Use an app called Evernote for those of you who want to get yourself some of that. I use Evernote, and I have my gratitude journal in there. And the next thing I have is my affirmation journal. So I write down 1 to 5 things that I'm grateful for. I then note 1 to 5 affirmations, positive affirmations. And they may be something like, you guys know I'm a big fan of this one, only good things happen for me. That's one of my favorite positive affirmations. They may be, I'm stronger than I think I am. I'm braver than I think I am. I am courageous. I've got this shit. Anything like that. 1 to 5 affirmations is the second thing I do. Then I move on to start stacking these wins I'm telling you guys about. So the first thing I'll do, the next thing I'll do, is I'll think of something that I achieved yesterday. And it can be something as simple as sending that email that I've been sitting on because it's making me uncomfortable. It can be as simple as getting to the gym at a particular time when I said I was going to get to the gym. It can be as simple as not cheating on my diet. Just one thing that I achieved yesterday. And then as I continue to stack these, that might be 1 to 5 things. But I'll start with one thing that I achieved yesterday, and then I'll move on to one thing that I'm going to achieve today, which once again starts very simple. It can be sending that email. It can be not cheating on my diet. It can be getting to the gym at a particular time. It can be having that discussion that I know is going to be uncomfortable when I need to have. Just needs to be one thing, one simple thing, something I achieved yesterday that I can go, yep, that was a win, and then something I'm going to achieve today. And this is then how I start stacking these wins, guys. So that one thing may go, okay, actually, I achieved more than one thing. I achieved, man, let me just rat off 10 things that I did yesterday. Fuck, I had a really good day yesterday. What am I going to do today? Man, I can think of 5 things straight off the top of my mind that I'm going to achieve today. I'm going to stack those 10 things yesterday with those 5 things today. I'm going to fucking kill today. Do that every single morning. Then I move on to, I recite my top 5 goals, and my goals spread over both fitness, business, personal life. So I have 5 very distinct goals that I don't even need to look at them. I can recite them straight off the top of my head. I recite my top 5 goals. I recite the top 5 emotions that I want to experience each and every day, top 5 positive emotions. And I recite my top 5 core values, the things that drive me, the things that make up my why. And then I go into a meditation. I meditate for 15 minutes every morning. And that's how I start every single morning. That process, including the 15 minutes of meditation, it probably takes me 15 minutes to go through my first thought, my 1 to 5 things I'm grateful for, my 1 to 5 affirmations, my 1 to 10 things that I achieved yesterday, my 1 to 10 things I'm going to achieve today, reciting my top 5 goals, my top 5 emotions, my top 5 core values, meditate for 15 minutes. That's done in 30 minutes. That's the first 30 minutes of each and every day. And let me tell you guys, when you are in periods of low motivation, setting a solid morning routine like that, and I'm not saying you have to copy mine. You can if you want. That's why I'm telling you what it is. It's some actual practical advice. Having that sort of habit and routine set in periods of low motivation, and a habit and routine that actually encourages you to stack wins, stack wins you had yesterday with wins you're going to have today. Stack goals that you're trying to achieve with your core values, with the emotions that you want to experience on that particular day, those positive emotions that are effectively what makes up how we feel each and every day. Having that sort of routine when you're in periods of low motivation, combined with exerting discipline against the habits and routines that you've set when your motivation levels are high, is going to start that action process. And that action process is what feeds motivation, and that therefore feeds more action. And you can start going from low levels of motivation down here, building up to high levels of motivation up here. And that's all I got for you guys today in this episode 19 of the MassiveJoes Show. How to increase motivation. Guys, as I say at the end of every episode, man, the MassiveJoes Show podcast, completely free. We're not running no fucking ads, endorsements, any of that bullshit that takes up the first 5 minutes of pretty much every other podcast I listen to. So I hope you guys appreciate that we get straight to the point in the MassiveJoes Show podcast. And what I do ask in return from you guys is just to share this podcast, share it in person, tell somebody about it, tell a friend, a family member, someone you care about. Take a screenshot of whatever podcast platform you're listening to, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, TuneIn, whatever it is. Take a screenshot, post it in your Instagram story, tag myself at Joseph Mencel, tag at MassiveJoes, spread the word of the MassiveJoes Show podcast. That's all I ask in return, man, because we are trying to reach as many people as possible and get these positive messages out that transcend both fitness and business. We're the only podcast on the planet that transcends both fitness and business, to be honest with you guys. I didn't even know what fucking category to put us on iTunes when we first started this shit, because we don't fit. We fit 2 different categories, fitness, business. But we're the only podcast that transcends both fitness and business, and I'm trying to get this message out to as many people as possible. So anything you guys can do to share, whether it's in person to person, whether it's through using social media platforms, whether it's through opening your fucking window and yelling it to your neighbors, I don't care. I appreciate each and every one of you guys for listening, for sharing, and I hope that this episode 19 of the MassiveJoes Show, How to Increase Motivation, you guys can actually take. I hope that there's 2 things. I hope that you guys listen to what I'm saying and can relate, and I know that all of you will. And then I also hope that you take that relatability and go, well, you know, if Joe experiences it, it's normal that I experience it. And then I also hope that you take the practical advice that I'm giving you guys on the importance of discipline and setting habits and routines when your motivation levels are high. And then the practical advice of stacking small wins, setting those positive morning routines that allow you to stack small wins and encourage you to stack small wins, so that when you find yourselves in periods of low motivation, whatever they've been caused by, I didn't even go into cause of different motivation levels. That's a different podcast. But whatever they've been caused by, when you find yourself in levels of low motivation, you have the tools, the tricks, the tips, the technique to get yourself out of that place, get yourself back to high levels of motivation, because we want those high levels of motivation to stick around as long as possible, because that's when we really get shit done. And that's a wrap for this episode 19 of the MassiveJoes Show. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, I'm coming to you from MassiveJoes.com. Stay massive. Thank you for listening to this episode of the MassiveJoes Show. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform, whether it be SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Podbean, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode of the MassiveJoes Show, ensure that you give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting platform. Until next time, we're coming to you from Massive.